The air seemed leaden as we walked among the buildings, weighted, if you will. The edifices were in a state of decay, shutters torn off, roofs crumbled under the weight of heavy snows gone by, windows dusty and leering. Shadows from odd corners and warped angles seemed to sit in sinister pools. We entered an old and rotting tavern first. Somehow it did not seem right that we should invade any of those houses to which people had retired when they wished privacy. An old and weather-scrubbed sign above the splintered door announced that this had been the Boar's Head Inn and Tavern. The door creaked hellishly on its one remaining hinge, and we stepped into the shadowed interior. The smell of rot and mold was vaporous and nearly overpowering, and beneath it seemed to lie an even deeper smell, a slimy and pestiferous smell, a smell of ages and the decay of ages, such a stench as might issue from corrupt coffins or violated tombs. I held my handkerchief to my nose, and Cal did likewise. We surveyed the place. "My God, sir," Cal said faintly. "It's never been touched," I finished for him. As indeed it had not. Tables and chairs stood about like ghostly guardians on the watch, dusty, warped by the extreme changes in temperature which the New England climate is known for, but otherwise perfect, as if they had waited through the silent, echoing decades for those long gone to enter once more, to call for a pint or a dram, to deal cards and light clay pipes. A small, square mirror hung beside the rules of the tavern, unbroken. Do you see the significance, Bones? Small boys are noted for exploration and vandalism. There's not a haunted house which stands, with windows intact, no matter how fearsome the eldritch inhabitants are rumored to be. Not a shadowy graveyard without at least one tombstone upended by young pranksters. Certainly there must be a score of young pranksters in preachers' corners, not 2 miles from Jerusalem's lot. Yet the innkeeper's glass, which must have cost him a nice sum, was intact, as were the other fragile items we found in our pokings. The only damage in Jerusalem's lot has been done by impersonal nature. The implication is obvious. Jerusalem's lot is a shunned town. But why? I have a notion, but before I even dare hint at it, I must proceed to the unsettling conclusion of our visit. We went up to the sleeping quarters and found beds made up, pewter water pitchers neatly placed beside them. The kitchen was likewise untouched by anything save the dust of the years and that horrible sunken stench of decay. The tavern alone would have been an antiquarian's paradise. The wondrously queer kitchen stove alone would fetch a pretty price at Boston auction. "What do you think, Cal?" I asked when we had emerged again into the uncertain daylight. "I think it's bad business, Mr. Boone," he replied in his doubtful way, "and that we must see more to know more." We gave the other shops scant notice. There was a hostelry with mouldering leather goods still hung on rusted flat nails, a chandler's, a warehouse with oak and pine still stacked within, a smithy. We entered 2 houses as we made our way toward the church at the center of the village. Both were perfectly in the Puritan mode, full of items a collector would give his arm for. Both deserted, and full of the same rotten scent. Nothing seemed to live or move at all in this but ourselves. We saw no insects, no birds, not even a cobweb fashioned in a window corner. Only dust. At last we reached the church. It reared above us, grim, uninviting, cold. Its windows were black with the shadows inside. and any godliness or sanctity had departed from it long ago. Of that I am certain. We mounted the steps, and I placed my hand on the large iron door pull. A set, dark look passed from myself to Calvin, and back again. I opened the portal. How long since that door had been touched? I would say with confidence that mine was the first in 50 years, perhaps longer. Rust-clogged hinges screamed as I opened it. The smell of rot and decay which smote us was nearly palpable. Cal made a gagging sound in his throat and twisted his head involuntarily for clearer air. "Sir," he asked, "are you sure that you are—" "I'm fine," I said calmly. But I did not feel calm, Bones, no more than I do now. I believe, with Moses, with Jeroboam, with increased Mather, and with our own Hansen when he was in a philosophical temperament, that there are spiritually noxious places, buildings where the milk of the cosmos has become sour and rancid. This church is such a place. I would swear to it. We stepped into a long vestibule equipped with a dusty coat rack and shelved hymnals. It was windowless. Oil lamps stood in niches here and there. An unremarkable room, I thought, until I heard Calvin's sharp gasp and saw what he had already noticed. It was an obscenity. I daren't describe that elaborately framed picture further than this: that it was done after the fleshy style of Rubens, and that it contained a grotesque travesty of a Madonna and Child. That strange, half-shadowed creatures sported and crawled in the background. "Lord," I whispered. "There's no Lord here," Calvin said, and his words seemed to hang in the air. I opened the door leading into the church itself, and the odor became a miasma, nearly overpowering. In the glimmering half-light of the afternoon, the pews stretched ghost-like to the altar. Above them was a high oaken pulpit and a shadow-struck narthex from which gold glimmered. With a half-sob, Calvin, that devout Protestant, made the holy sign, and I followed suit. For the gold was a large, beautifully wrought cross, but it was hung upside down, symbol of Satan's mass. "We must be calm," I heard myself saying. "We must be calm, Calvin. We must be calm." But a shadow had touched my heart, and I was afraid as I had never been. I have walked beneath death's umbrella and thought there was none darker. But there is. There is. We walked down the aisle, our footfalls echoing above and around us. We left tracks in the dust. And at the altar, there were other tenebrous objets d'art. I will not, cannot let my mind dwell upon them. I began to mount the pulpit itself. "Don't, Mr. Boone!" Cal cried suddenly. "I'm afraid!" But I had gained it. A huge book lay open on the stand, writ both in Latin and crabbed runes, which looked to my unpracticed eye either Druidic or pre-Celtic. I enclose a card with several of the symbols redrawn from memory. I closed the book and looked at the words stamped into the leather. De vermis mysteris. My Latin is rusty, but serviceable enough to translate the mysteries of the worm. As I touched it, that accursed church and Calvin's white upturned face seemed to swim before me. It seemed that I heard low, chanting voices full of hideous yet eager fear, and below that sound another, filling the bowels of the earth. An hallucination, I doubt it not. But at the same moment, the church was filled with a very real sound, which I can only describe as a huge and macabre turning beneath my feet. The pulpit trembled beneath my fingers. The desecrated cross trembled on the wall. We exited together, Cal and I, leaving the place to its own darkness, and neither of us dared look back until we had crossed the rude planks spanning the stream. I will not say we defiled the 1900 years man has spent climbing upward from a hunkering and superstitious savage by actually running, but I would be a liar to say that we strolled. That is my tale. You mustn't shadow your recovery by fearing that the fever has touched me again. Cal can attest to all in these pages, up to and including the hideous noise. So I close, saying only that I wish I might see you, knowing that much of my bewilderment would drop away immediately, and that I remain your friend and admirer, Charles. October 19th, 1850. Dear Bones, developments of a disquieting nature. The noises in the house have intensified, and I'm growing more to the conclusion that rats are not all that move inside our walls. Calvin and I went on another fruitless search for hidden crannies or passages, but found nothing. How poorly we would fit into one of Mrs. Radcliffe's romances. Cal claims, however, that much of the sound emanates from the cellar, and it is there we intend to explore tomorrow. It makes me no easier to know that Cousin Stephen's sister met her unfortunate end there. Her portrait, by the by, hangs in the upstairs gallery. Marcella Boone was a sadly pretty thing, if the artist got her right, and I do know she never married. At times I think Mrs. Cloris was right, that it is a bad house. It has certainly held nothing but gloom for its past inhabitants. But I have more to say of the redoubtable Mrs. Cloris, for I've had this day a second interview with her. As the most level-headed person from the corners that I have met thus far, I sought her out this afternoon after an unpleasant interview which I will relate. The wood was to have been delivered this morning, and when noon came and passed, and no wood with it, I decided to take my daily walk into the town itself. My object was to visit Thompson, the man with whom Cal did business. It has been a lovely day, full of the crisp snap of bright autumn, and by the time I reached the Thompsons' homestead, Cal, who remained home to poke further through Uncle Stephen's library, gave me adequate directions. I felt in the best mood that these last few days have seen, and quite prepared to forgive Thompson's tardiness with the wood. The place was a massive tangle of weeds and fallen-down buildings in need of paint. To the left of the barn, a huge sow, ready for November butchering, grunted and wallowed in a muddy sty, and in the littered yard between house and outbuildings, a woman in a tattered gingham dress was feeding chickens from her apron. When I hailed her, she turned a pale and vapid face toward me. The sudden change in expression from utter doltish emptiness to one of frenzied terror was quite wonderful to behold. I can only think she took me for Stephen himself, for she raised her hand in the prong-fingered sign of the evil eye and screamed. The chicken feed scattered on the ground, and the fowls fluttered away, squawking. Before I could utter a sound, a huge, hulking figure of a man, clad only in long-handled underwear, lumbered out of the house with a squirrel rifle in one hand and a jug in the other. From the red light in his eye and the unsteady manner of talking, I judged that this was Thompson the woodcutter himself. "Hey, Boone!" he roared. "God damn your eyes!" He dropped the jug a-rolling, and also made the sign. "I've come," I said with as much equanimity as I could muster under the circumstances, "because the wood has not, according to the agreement you struck with my man, God damn your man too, say I. And for the first time I noticed that beneath his bluff and bluster he was deadly afraid. I began seriously to wonder if he mightn't actually use his rifle against me in his excitement. I began carefully. As a gesture of courtesy, you might— God damn your courtesy! Very well, then, I said with as much dignity as I could muster. I bid you good day until you are more in control of yourself. And with this I turned away and began down the road to the village. Don't she come back, he screamed after me. Stick with your evil up there. Cursed, cursed, cursed. He pelted a stone at me, which struck my shoulder. I would not give him the satisfaction of dodging. So I sought out Mrs. Cloris, determined to solve the mystery of Thompson's enmity at least. She is a widow, and none of your confounded matchmaking, Bones. She is easily 15 years my senior, and I'll not see 40 again, and lives by herself in a charming little cottage at the ocean's very doorstep. I found the lady hanging out her wash, and she seemed genuinely pleased to see me. I found this a great relief. It is vexing almost beyond words to be branded pariah for no understandable reason. Mr. Boone, she said, offering a half-curtsy, if you come about washing, I take none past September. My rheumatiz pains me so that it's trouble enough to do my own. I wish laundry was the subject of my visit. I've come for help, Mrs. Cloris. I must know all you can tell me about Chapelwaite and Jerusalem's lot, and why the townfolk regard me with such fear and suspicion. Jerusalem's lot? You know about that, then? Yes, I replied, and visited it with my companion a week ago. God! She went pale as milk and tottered. I put out a hand to steady her. Her eyes rolled horribly, and for a moment I was sure she would swoon. Mrs. Cloris, I am sorry if I've said anything to— Come inside, she said. You must know. Sweet Jesu, the evil days have come again. She would not speak more until she had brewed strong tea in her sunshiny kitchen. When it was before us, she looked pensively out of the ocean for a time. Inevitably, her eyes and mine were drawn to the jutting brow of Chapelwaite Head, where the house looked out over the water. The large bay window glittered in the rays of the westering sun like a diamond. The view was beautiful, but strangely disturbing. She suddenly turned to me and declared vehemently, Mr. Boone, you must leave Chapelwaite immediately. I was flabbergasted. There's been an evil breath in the air since you took up residence. In the last week, since you set foot on that accursed place, there have been omens and portents. A call over the face of the moon, flocks of whippoorwills which roost in the cemeteries, an unnatural birth. You must leave. When I found my tongue, I spoke as gently as I could. Mrs. Cloris, these things are dreams. You must know that. Is it a dream that Barbara Brown gave birth to a child with no eyes? Or that Clifton Brockett found a flat, pressed trail 5 feet wide in the woods beyond Chapelwaite, where all had withered and gone white? And can you, who have visited Jerusalem's lot, say with truth that nothing still lives there? I could not answer. The scene in that hideous church sprang before my eyes. She clamped her gnarled hands together in an effort to calm herself. I know of these things only from my mother, and her mother before her. Do you know the history of your family, as it applies to Chapelwaite? Vaguely, I said. The house has been the home of Philip Boone's line since the 1780s. His brother Robert, my grandfather, located in Massachusetts after an argument over stolen papers. Of Philip's side I know little, except that an unhappy shadow fell over it, extending from father to son to grandchildren. Marcella died in a tragic accident, and Stephen fell to his death. It was his wish that Chapelwaite become the home of me and mine, and that the family rift thus be mended. "Never to be mended," she whispered. "You know nothing of the original quarrel?" Robert Boone was discovered rifling his brother's desk. "Philip Boone was mad," she said. "A man who trafficked with the unholy. The thing which Robert Boone attempted to remove was a profane Bible, writ in the old tongues, Latin, Druidic, others, a hell book." "De vermis mysterious?" She recoiled as if struck. "You know of it?" "I have seen it, touched it." It seemed again she might swoon. A hand went to her mouth as if to stifle an outcry. "Yes, in Jerusalem's lot, on the pulpit of a corrupt and desecrated church." "Still there? Still there, then?" She rocked in her chair. "I had hoped God in his wisdom had cast it into the pit of hell." What relation had Philip Boone to Jerusalem's lot? "Blood relation," she said darkly. "The mark of the beast was on him, although he walked in the clothes of the Lamb. And on the night of October 31st, 1789, Philip Boone disappeared, and the entire populace of that damned village with him." She would say little more. In fact, seemed to know little more. She would only reiterate her pleas that I leave, giving as reason something about blood calling to blood, and muttering about those who watch and those who guard. As twilight drew on, she seemed to grow more agitated rather than less, and to placate her, I promised her that her wishes would be taken under strong consideration. I walked home through lengthening, gloomy shadows, my good mood quite dissipated, and my head spinning with questions which still plague me. Cal greeted me with the news that our noises in the walls have grown worse still, as I can attest at this moment. I try to tell myself that I can hear only rats, but then I see the terrified, earnest face of Mrs. Cloris. The moon has risen over the sea, bloated, full, the color of blood, staining the ocean with a noxious shade. My mind turns to that church again, and... But you shall not hear of that, Bones. It is too mad. It is time I slept, I think. My thoughts go out to you. Regards, Charles. The following is from a pocket journal of Calvin McCann. October 20, 1850. Took the liberty this morning of forcing the lock which binds the book closed. Did it before Mr. Boone arose. No help. It is all in cipher. A simple one, I believe. Perhaps I may break it as easily as the lock. A diary, I am certain, a hand oddly like Mr. Boone's own. Whose book, shelved in the most obscure corner of this library, and locked across the pages. It seems old, but how to tell? The corrupting air has largely been kept from its pages. More later, if time. Mr. Boone set upon looking about the cellar. Am afraid these dreadful goings-on will be too much for his chancy health yet. I must try to persuade him. But he comes. As I feared, his health has broken. Dear God, our Father who art in heaven, cannot bear to think of it, yet it is planted, burned on my brain like a tintype, that horror in the cellar. Alone now, 8:30. House silent, but found him swooned over his writing table. He still sleeps, yet for those few moments how nobly he acquitted himself, while I stood paralyzed and shattered. His skin is waxy, cool. Not the fever again, God be thanked. I daren't move him or leave him to go to the village. And if I did go, who would return with me to aid him? Who would come to this cursed house? Oh, the cellar! The things in the cellar that have haunted our walls.